Welcome, everyone.
Welcome.
We're going to get this talk started, and we'll do that with intros. We're going to be talking about a hands-on lab for red and blue teams. The brunt of this prezzo is going to be talking through some technology stacks, but realistically, what Mike and I hope for all of you is to be able to leave and take this to your organizations and be able to, for free, spin up a lab and only take a day or two to be able to test out these attacks, learn how to defend, learn how to configure, and talk about attack surface that is pretty vast and that is devastating, to coin a phrase, that many, many organizations that we've seen when we've been red teaming and gaining access to ServiceNow. So first, before we get into all that jazz, let's introduce ourselves. Mike, why don't you go first?
Hey, I'm Mike Bailey. I have been in IT for way too long. I made the move over to security in 2008. I've spent most of my offensive career in financial firms.
It's been an offensive career.
Yeah, it's been a very offensive career across the board. And I also am a big infrastructure guy. I love building labs, building out infrastructure as code, and doing all those kind of things. Yeah, that's me.
Unapologetic.
And I'm an unapologetic Taylor Swift fan, so yeah. So.
I am Nick Popovich. My handle is Pipefish. The stuff's on the board. You can read it. I am the founder and owner of Rota Security. We're putting on Lockpick Village. We're a sponsor. We love this community. Been involved since year one, and excited to get in. So before we get into kind of Mike speaking to the idea of different levers that you can use to rapidly spin up a lab to test some aspects of this out, I wanted to give a quick context and story to the referenced work. Back in 2021, we actually came across some of the attacks and techniques that you saw, I want to say natively or without help. We spent a significant amount of time, me and the team, working through ServiceNow, and none of this was, there were no blogs and videos and tutorials about this. Now, that's not to say we were the first to find it. Everybody that had found it wasn't talking about it. So we went through this months-long discovery of attacking ServiceNow from the inside out, and it was really neat stuff. And also, just a quick caveat on that note, whenever we or somebody coming with an attacker's perspective is speaking to a specific platform, we always kind of have to remind folks that knowledge in and of itself is neutral. When you learn something just like lockpicking, you learn offensive tradecraft, you learn something, the knowledge is neutral. It's how you apply it. So similarly, when we're talking about attack techniques in a specific platform, this knowledge can be useful for defenders to learn how to have telemetry and alerts and high fidelity signals that can help them detect, respond, and react to incidents. And then folks who are supposed to test those can use them. But keep in mind, this is not a poop on ServiceNow talk. ServiceNow is a large, complicated enterprise orchestration and management platform, and wielded appropriately, configured appropriately, and with the appropriate telemetry, it can be a great asset to organizations. It's got so many bells and whistles. But on the reverse side, with great complexity comes great nonsense. And so there's a lot of stuff in here that for organizations, even folks who even have ServiceNow for years may not even know. And so again, the point of this talk is to show you those attack surfaces and some of the referenced work. So like I said, Mike and I started collaborating on this in February. My NDA had kind of run up and I was able to speak about some of this stuff, and it was interesting. And then MDSec dropped a blog in March, and it's phenomenal, and it is red teaming ServiceNow. And what's really interesting is a significant number of their talking points were new to me. And they go over 5 or 6 interesting ways to execute code and go over some neat stuff. That blog, by the way, these slides will be made available. You'll be able to have these. This is getting recorded as well, so you'll be able to see it.
Yeah, one link.
Yeah. So this link here is going over some of the attack techniques, but what I thought was really interesting as Mike and I dug in, they had found novel ways to do things that we haven't even found out. So you're going to get 5 or 6 interesting techniques from that blog. We're going to show you some interesting red teaming ways that aren't even, the Venn diagram crosses over, but it's novel and neat. And so we also just kind of came up with these attacks somewhat on the fly. So, and when I said did this live, kind of the streets, this was just weeks and weeks of going in and asking the question, the true hacker question of, what if? What if I do this? What if I do this? What does this do? What does that do? Those types of things.
But to just add on to that, what was really cool was when they came out with this, we thought, well, this talk sunk. I'm glad we put this in there and we're going to look like idiots and just basically recreate this blog. But like Nick said, it wound up, it was almost, I want to say it was almost 50-50 of like, they hadn't done the things that we had done, and we had things that were completely different. And we're like, oh, and then some of it, there will be an overlap between their blog and some of the stuff. There's like more than 10 ways to skin this cat when you get inside of ServiceNow. There's some things that we're doing by ways that we found, and then they found the same way, totally different way. So there's a lot to it. So.
And also, really only half of this talk is about, maybe even less than half, is like the actual attacks. Again, this is really how you can set up a lab, because this took us weeks and weeks and weeks to get a lab where we could actually do this type of activity. And the blog that they mention here kind of expects you to already have a lab environment or be familiar with it. So instead of you having to take weeks and weeks and weeks and struggle, hanging out, struggling getting a lab up, you can get this done in a day and be able to, in a non-production environment, start trying to test some of these things out. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike for a few minutes just to go through a couple of the different ways that, as we spun up different labs and tried it out, some ways that you can spin up Windows systems, or Windows and Linux systems for a lab environment. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so is everybody familiar with Ludus? Anybody familiar with Ludus? So if you haven't seen Ludus, definitely take a look at it. The old days of having to stand up and install the whole infrastructure yourself, to get labs set up so that you can test something and just spend 10 hours getting to a point so that you can run one command to see what it does, has always been a crux of the industry when it comes to doing research and doing any type of things like that. And the crew behind Ludus actually, they quote one tweet on their website that basically says that 90% of cybersecurity research is spinning up the labs to do the actual research, right? What they did was they've tremendously fixed this problem. So the whole thing is based around YAML. You can get next slide. So what you can do is everything now is just stood up by, it's all infrastructure by code using, unfortunately, YAML, which sucks. But it does make it so that you can build out all these labs just through YAML, Ansible, Terraform. It'll do the whole thing automated for you. And what's great is they've started to stand up a community around this, and the community is just dropping labs after labs after labs. So if you need the Game of Thrones Active Directory, done. Just hit the command, go get a cup of coffee, come back. The whole infrastructure stood up for you. If you need an SCCM lab, same thing. What are some of the other ones they have out there? They've got all the Active Directory certification attacks that everybody's, the hotness right now is all the cert attacks on AD. Whole labs are stood up. Everybody's already written the code for you. You literally just go download the YAML file, hit return, bam, builds the whole thing out on a Proxmark server. So next. So these are the boxes that come native with it right now. So it's got Kali, every version of Windows, almost every version of Ubuntu, the Rocky Linux, Debian, and these are all the templates that are just right there, already pre-provisioned. It'll go out, it uses Packer, pulls the images down, builds them out, builds the Active Directory, does everything for you. These just sit as a template on your server. And the great thing is you don't need that much hardware anymore. Like they even have on the site, they've got links to a couple of boxes that you can just buy straight up that are about $500, 96 gigs of RAM, a 2 terabyte SSD, little nook that you can set in the corner, not necessarily a nook, but that kind of style box, so you don't have to build out these giant labs anymore. Next slide.
Think about how much research has been left to the pile because you're like, I feel like spinning up a stupid lab, and I'm just going to go do something else.
And the cool thing is they call them ranges. Like I think they're trying to commercialize this, right? And I hope when this gets on the internet, they don't get mad. But what they're doing is they're building different ways to get into the labs and set up that kind of stuff. They've got ranges, and you can sit there and create all sorts of different ranges for individuals. So you could stand up the SCCM lab, and you could just stand up an Active Directory lab, and you can hit save it at a certain point in time and just go back to it when you need to, or tell it to revert back to 2 days ago after you've screwed with it. So it's got all this kind of enterprise functionality in a free open source software, which is really awesome. So this is like what the lab interface looks like. It'll do all the certs for you. It'll do all the let's encrypt. Everything goes out, gets all that stuff done for you. Makes it like swimmingly easy. So what we did is this is an example of the labs that we have built out. So we've got a whole number of different labs that we just create, and we can get whole infrastructures with Exchange and everything just stood up and sitting out there, and they're literally on a little box where we have basically little baby enterprises that we can run all the tests we need to on whenever we're
Just think
testing
about how
stuff.
value that is. Think about when you've gotten a pen test or your CIO or CISO comes in and says, hey, this new CVE is out. Are we vulnerable or what are our mitigations? Can our detection systems, do we have telemetry? Do we have high fidelity signals? Well, what we would do with our customers when they engage us in these types of situations is we'll go build out a lab, set it all up, and we'll try and simulate it in their environment so that they can go and test. But they could also, I am a hacker and I'm a learning businessman. I'm a terrible businessman because I'm like, well, you can just do this yourselves. You don't have to pay us for that. You could just go here and set up your own lab and use your own tools. And there's truth to that. So you guys have a beefy box in your environment. You want to just spin up labs to test out the latest AD attacks, those types of things. This is powerful.
And yeah, I mean, it's the old adage of, if it's free, the times what you're paying for it with when it comes to building stuff out. What they've done is they've taken out all this out. Like, you don't have to do any of this crap anymore of building out a whole rack of stuff and gear and creating these entire networks. All you got to do is just get a NUC, or heck, you can do it on like an older laptop, a slightly older laptop is perfectly fine too. So for this lab, what it turns out is all we need to get it stood up from an infrastructure standpoint is just a simple domain controller and a workstation. That's all we had to do for this. So that's, and we'll get into it, ServiceNow, that's the easy part of getting ServiceNow set up. And then the one last thing I wanted to touch on from an infrastructure standpoint is Pangolin. If you haven't seen it, what they've done is they have created a a free piece of software that came out like 6 months ago. It is a zero trust WireGuard system that has integrated identity access management, two-factor, and also will tie in SSO into Google, anything like that. And you could set it up so we use it to be able to go, you get access to this lab, you get access to this lab, you get access to this lab, and it's all through a web interface, so you can just give the user a username and password, or your friend a username and password, or whoever you're collaborating with, username and password. They go there, they can just grab their keys, boom, they're right directly into that lab environment, wherever it is that you have out there. So, so those two tools have like drastically changed the ability to stand up infrastructure and collaborate with people, where it used to be a week or a weekend or like several nights of screwing around in a lab to get things up and standing up VPNs and all that kind of stuff. These two tools basically make it so you can do this kind of stuff in like a matter of hours. So really cool.
This is just an example of Pangolin.
Yeah, that's just an example of the interface. So yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's just the example of the interface. Like I was saying, you could turn up, who's enabled, what they're allowed to get to, what sites they can get into. And then they, when they get in there, they can just pull their keys directly. So it's kind of makes it real turnkey if you're working with somebody that you don't necessarily trust to get into your entire environment, or you just want to give somebody keys to just a specific thing. It's fantastic. So super easy to stand up. Takes like about 20 minutes. It's just a Docker package. So yeah.
Nice.
Nice.
So that was kind of the infrastructure piece. It was Windows heavy, but that can be really anything. And the nice thing is you can create these, I don't know the nomenclature for those specific platforms, but you have your playbooks, your recipes, your whatever files, and it's amazing to be able to do security research with a click of a button. And anything that doesn't hinder you and have you taking time configuring nonsense, and you can actually go into poking and prodding, is going to be a benefit. Because there's I guarantee that the rest of the room, there's probably CVEs people are sitting on, they don't know it because they haven't taken the time to actually poke at an idea they had. So now, we are going to talk about getting a demo environment in ServiceNow, which is surprisingly not as straightforward as you would think. So getting the demo environment, we're going to walk through that piece, and then we'll go through, we have decided to do a live demo. So you can offer up the incense and goats and everything you can to the demo gods. I have recorded no video. I have no backup. If this doesn't work, we're hooped. But we're going to do a live RCE code execution demo on how to abuse ServiceNow in kind of an interesting way. And then realistically, we want to talk about, too, the compensating controls and mitigations and things you could do if you have a deep ServiceNow investment in your IT ecosystem, how you could go about preventing these types of attacks, or at least detecting this type of activity. When we have used this on red teams, and it's just 50% of the time, it works 100% of the time.
Yep.
So a big piece, I want to level set for some folks who may not know the infrastructure within ServiceNow. There's this thing called a mid server, a management instrumentation and discovery server. And so basically, the mid server can act as a proxy and a broker for ServiceNow that's operating in the cloud.
I was just going to say, taking it a step back, just so everybody, is everybody aware what ServiceNow is?
That's a great
just
that's
diving
a great
in.
point. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so ServiceNow is basically a company that they've created a software that is now turned into a giant, bloated, trying to do everything kind of software. But what it basically does is it's interfacing from I guess what we call it, like a service management kind of platform.
Yeah, I think the ChatGPT of it was an enterprise orchestration and configuration management platform.
Yeah.
So some of the ways that we've seen it implemented is it handles all the workflows for user provisioning. You know, it's got a lot of workflow management, orchestration of hardware, software, ticketing, asset inventory. So to Mike's point, it becomes a SaaS provider that has to have hooks into a lot of different things, a lot of different systems that order parts, discover parts, personnel. And as you hear me say all the things that it has hooks into, it has to have privileged access to a lot of these things. You want anything else?
Oh, no, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, the problem is, like Nick said, the bigger things get, the more chaotic they get. And then especially with the level of access that's required into an organization with this software, there are numerous places for people to accidentally give it too much permissions or misconfigure it ever so slightly, and that's where we get into a lot of this stuff.
So when you look here at this drawing from their own documentation, the mid server kind of acts as an honest trust broker to do very privileged things in very privileged parts of the environment. So ServiceNow is a SaaS platform, and it's out in the cloud. But if it needs to add users to AD in a workflow where you have a new employee joining your organization, ServiceNow is going to do its thing. It's going to record them, and then it's going to kick off jobs and workflows. And that will, the mid server is a Java application that's running on a Linux or Windows host, and it does the things that you ask it to do. It adds users, it changes groups, it changes firewall rules, it performs discovery. It does a lot of important things. And even in its own documentation, it has the concept, they call it just enough privileges, or just JEA, just enough access. It's a concept of least privilege. If you go through the ServiceNow docs and you're working with a TAM, they're going to work with you pretty carefully to try and get to that point. But what we've seen in most organizations is they're trying to do what they got to do, and this is another duty as assigned for an overworked IT admin who's been told, hey, we're pushing out ServiceNow. It's the ServiceNow project. We got 2 months. And they're getting it working as best they can. But the easiest thing to do is make sure that permissions are not an issue. So they just go give it God mode on everything. They give it root everywhere. They give it domain admin. They have service accounts that have not looked at granular access controls. They go through and just kind of YOLO with permissions, and you're going to end up with a problem. And that is just a constant theme, is that folks have not gone through the process of locking things down, because doing security is hard. At times it's a barrier to productivity, because why isn't this working? Well, it's probably the permissions. And then the constant, let's just test it. Let's give it domain admin and test it, and the test works. And then the test is just production now. So, yaha, as is tradition. So this is just a small snapshot of the capabilities, but you can see, just as from an attacker's perspective, I think probably every single one of those items would cause you to say, anything that allows you to do administrative stuff and attack these types of servers or leverage these services is going to be bananas. So basically, I'm going to burn through, I'm not going through all 56 of these slides. We got like 10 slides left, and we're going to get into the live demo, get that going, get into questions, and then roll. But there's a trick. There's a couple tricks and gotchas that can really hamper you getting a working demo up. But kudos to ServiceNow for giving you a free access. If you go to the developer, go ahead.
That might change after.
Yeah, after this talk, that might change.
They might be like, we're not doing that anymore.
So you go to developerservicenow.com, you sign up for a free account, and you say, sign up and start building. And then you ask to create now you look at the flag up there. About 3 weeks ago, I had let our instance, if you don't log into the instance in 2 days, it goes to sleep. If you don't operate in the instance in 10 days, it's just released. It says, we're currently experiencing issues with the personal developer instances. And I was like, F. So you go in, you ask, what's your experience? Do you need an IDE or a guided experience? And then you go to request instance. You can choose the release. So DC, Xanadu, or Yokohama. And you notice there that all of them said no instances available. So you're going to come to that every single time. Every single time you're going to click request, and it says you've been added to the wait list. Now, that wait list can be anything from, go ahead and go to the next slide. That wait list can be anything from like a day or two to like a week. But when you request an instance, you're just sitting there waiting. So I hadn't recorded any of this. I want to do this live, and I was like, well, gee, I hope we get an instance before the talk. So once you create an instance, there's a couple things you're going to do. Now we're going to go through, you've gotten your instance and they've given you creds. Now we're going to walk through getting it set up so that you can actually start having demo data. And they do a great job of giving you not just an empty shell. You can actually inject demo data, demo workflows, and all that good stuff. But here's the steps to get it into the most kind of real place. First thing you do is create an app. You name it, you continue. You have the roles. It's fine to accept both the default roles. You could add others if you want to experiment, if your organization has other roles. Once you get in, this is where things are going to fall off the wheels. Or the rails are going to fall off, the wheels are going to fall off the rails. I don't know how that saying goes. There's a significant amount of ServiceNow that you don't know. I don't know how to get there through the UI. And I don't think they know how to get there through the UI. Like if you watch any ServiceNow videos, they just go directly to endpoints. And there it is. There's the wizard. Or I'll show you in a moment how to get to places where it doesn't even show up. But a lot of what you're going to want to see is when you click on all, and you start typing in that window, that's where the different aspects of the environment are. But there's also stuff, very cool things that you can do from an attacker's perspective and just browse to these endpoints. And
We'll show you that.
we're going to show you a list of endpoints. We'll show you how to mess with them. And if you have, obviously work with your organization if you have permission. Just browsing these instances can tell you immediately if there's permissions issues. There's a ton of these endpoints that for organizations we go to with lowest level, just started that day, just an Active Directory user logged in with SSO and Federation. You can go to these endpoints and see powerful things and query powerful things, and all users should not have access to it, but they've kind of set it up with the default permission set so that all users will just have access to everything. So directly browsing to some of these endpoints is going to be very powerful, and we'll show you that in a sec. So some of these, and we'll just do it live in a moment. We'll just do it live right now. But these are a couple endpoints that are really neat that you can't get to it through the UI, but if you just directly browse to it, you pop into it. So like as an example, let's just take a look at it. I'm going to log into our developer ServiceNow instance. Maybe. 1, 2, 3, 4. Same password as my luggage. So when you hop into your developer instance, it's going to look like this. And let's just pick one of these. So this lists all the table names. Whoops. So let me get into like copy out of the slide mode. So in this case, going to this table here, sysdboobjectlist.do, you can't find that in the UI. You can't find out how to get there in the UI. Or if you can, I don't know how to. Right, that'd be funny. They fixed the permissions. So you can just come in and go into these tables, and some of these tables, once you can go to all the search actions, you can look at custom actions, you can look at crazy things. And what's crazy is, as a low-level user, first thing I'm going to do to just check permissions, I shouldn't be able to see all tables in the entire ServiceNow instance and then be able to, this isn't just see the tables. There are other endpoints and clicking through this. You can just click through this and get into the data of these tables and just see a ton of stuff. So for recon standpoint, if you can, and we'll talk about how we typically find access into ServiceNow. Because again, this is going to be, you've gained access to ServiceNow as a low-level user, or you've gained access to ServiceNow in some fashion. And we'll show you some ServiceNow inception in just a second on how we can use ServiceNow to elevate privileges in ServiceNow. But this is just an example of seeing endpoints that, like, all these search actions, you can go in and query these search actions, and some of them are highly privileged. Once you get into the actual tables, you can start pulling the data. It's just some interesting things. So honestly, if you don't get anything else from this talk, this list of endpoints is going to be super valuable. Here's another, these are just different table names that from an attacker's perspective, you can go in and get a ton of stuff. The number of times we have seen automation jobs and pipelines for workflows from ServiceNow shipping out emails where the token or the credential or the just-in-time access token that has been requested through ServiceNow is in the email logs. And as a user, I can just look at all the email logs and see what the emails are sending out. And it's just a treasure trove of data for privilege escalation, finding endpoints, et cetera. So these are just some interesting tables that we like to look at. So this is super duper powerful. When you're in ServiceNow, if you're on a long-term red team engagement, say you're an internal red team, you got months to go, you can take your time. But if you're doing a 2, 3, 6-week red team engagement, time is of the essence. And you need to be able to search across the entire instance rapidly. Well, when you are in the UI of ServiceNow, typically, if it's not a custom workflow, the UI looks like this. And this search is looking at within the context that you're in right now. So if you're in this table, it's here. If you're in another aspect, it's there. So you need a global search. And to get to a global search in the UI is a pain in the butt, but they just have a very simple endpoint called globalsearch.do. I'm actually going to, the two are the most powerful. Textsearch.do is nice because it's a little bit more forgiving on the syntax. But either of those, if as a user, this is another way you can test your user permissions. If you can put in things like generic words like password or ticket or incident in the textsearch.do endpoint, that top one, and you get results returned, the permissions are jacked on that instance because you shouldn't, as a user, be able to search through everything. What we find is we can get in as a user and search through every incident, every help desk ticket, every single thing put in by any user. And I think you see where we're going with that and how we can use it as a privileged escalation system. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to go here, and I am going to showcase using this, this endpoint, the textsearch.do. What that does is it searches across all workspaces and contexts in the ServiceNow implementation. And you don't have to be in the right window, because you can miss things. You know, we were originally on these engagements, and we're searching through, looking for password, ID, RSA, looking for interesting things. I'm not finding a squat, and my teammates are like, oh, I'm finding this, finding that. I was like, how did you do that? He goes, oh, I stumbled across this article, and the URL had this textsearch.do thing, so I tried it, and it worked out. So I'm going to do a search that shows up with nothing. Apparently, it shows up with a lot of things. Oh, yeah, I have a demo incidents in there and stuff like that. So this would be an example of being able to search across the entire ServiceNow instance. So when you're trying to do data pillaging and you're trying to find stuff, I mean, this right here is better than a pen test. I mean, this is going to be a post-X test that you can run in your own ServiceNow right now. Just start searching through keywords using textsearch.do. Look for password. Look for admin. Look for SVC. And here's a little pro tip, little hacker pro tip, something that a colleague taught me a while ago. This has returned so many dividends when we're doing data searching. So if you look for this specific thing, C3, big Z, little j, anybody know what C3, Z, J, and I'm doing a star to say, wildcard search. Anybody know what that is? I didn't until I did. That is a base 64 encoded string of SVC. So if you look for, actually I don't remember if it's SVC or ADM. It's one of them. But the idea is looking for the base 64 encoded string of PAS or PAS or SVC or ADM or admin. You are going to find basic authentication, basic authorization headers, basic authentication tokens or strings stuck in requests in help desk tickets. Like some developers saying, oh, I'm making these requests and it's not working. They're pasting the curl request there. They're pasting the output from a debugger. And you're going to find either authorization tokens. So if you look for strings like basic, you look for the base 64 encoded value. You look for authorization token. You can find really powerful things. So in this case, a super common route. And what we end up doing is once we get user level access into a ServiceNow, which we'll talk about some of an endpoint that we can get into toitly. We are going to start doing this, and it's so often, 90% of the time, if their permissions are jacked, and you're dealing with all of the possible help desk tickets, you're going to find creds. You're going to find creds to something, to an app and to something.
Yeah,
and
anybody who's ever done a red team engagement or even pen test in any enterprise has gone through Confluence and SharePoint and everything else and found a treasure trove of things in there. I mean, that's like just a given. This is like the technical, far more technical search database of things to go and find these things in, because some of the stuff, and we'll get into that in a second, the things that are being executed, have the strings in them. Like the command that's being fired to the machine has the password because it needs to have it to run on that machine and that service account and things like that. And all that stuff's logged in there, and all that stuff is searchable with their great search interface, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it just makes, as you're about to see when we get in now to start executing the commands and whatnot, ServiceNow, a misconfigured, poorly implemented, unmonitored ServiceNow platform can become your attack platform. It is a trusted device that's expected to be scanning all over the place and expected to be sending out interesting, novel, administrative packets all over the place. And you can do everything that you would imagine wanting to do from a pen test workstation or a pen test home from the ServiceNow platform, which we're about to get into. So what we usually do is we get access in, and how do we get access in? So many organizations, because it's SaaS, they're going to have SSO. They're going to have federated login so that you log in and they'll either have IP restrictions. Most of the Zscalers and the zero trust things and the things that run agents on laptops, even without a VPN, they can have traffic go through for certain, through trusted endpoints. So they can do IP restrictions for ServiceNow. They can make sure that you have to be a domain joined system, as an example. There's a lot of conditional access policies. There's tons and tons of ways to make sure, okay, only my authorized users from my environment can access ServiceNow. But for whatever reason, tons and tons of time, if you look, the kind of legacy admin login pages for ServiceNow are kind of open to the internet without being specifically locked down. So if you just find an organization's ServiceNow endpoint and you can't log in because you don't have good creds, but you found a username and password that you want to try and use, like a service account, or you found credentials that you now want to log into ServiceNow with, and it's not working using their kind of standard login. If you go to navpage.do or login.do, those endpoints, usually they miss them. There's no SSO configured. There's usually a more pretty customer-facing endpoint that's designed to be hooking into the federated login and using AD creds and just seamlessly logging in. But if you just find and navigate directly to navpage.do or login.do, you're going to be able to log in. And then you take those credentials that you found in a help desk ticket as an unprivileged user, and more often than not, you're going to find, especially if you start searching for base64 encoded value of ADM or SVC and keywords like ServiceNow or Snow, you'll end up finding ServiceNow's own configs. Or if you're on a pen test and you get access to configuration files on boxes that are managed by ServiceNow activities, you'll end up finding ServiceNow credentials in those. And the MDSec team that did this research as well, complimentary, they have a ServiceNow credential decryptor tool. It's pretty sweet. They did some really cool research. We'll take a look at that. Probably never. But you guys can. So I think we're done with setting up. I want to go through a couple more things on getting the lab environment set up, and then we're going to go into executing some code. This is the one, there's a gotcha here. So once you get your environment, you've got your situation here, you want to make sure you change your user role. That you initially log in as a user. And that's valuable. You can log in to test different things you can do as a user, as an admin. But to do a lot of the neat things that we're talking about, especially with the mid-server, you're going to want to go into your instance, say change role to admin. They have their own docs. You can go and how to set up a mid-server. So the last step, now we've got ServiceNow into a good place. You can go add an experience, add an app, add data. This is self-explanatory. It's just feeding the database full of demo crap, incidents, tickets, users, fun stuff to query, blah, 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 blah. So then you can go to their mid-server guided setup step and kind of walk through it. But basically, when you go in and you can download the mid-server installation file, and you've gone and followed Mike's instructions, and you've spun up a Windows domain, for example. You'd go to your domain controller and you'd download this installer file. This is...
Well, just real quick, you don't, I mean, I think...
It doesn't have to be a domain controller.
I think they even say not, do they say not to on their website? But everybody does it anyways. People could...
No, yeah, I mean, the mid-server at times has to, usually, their best practice is it says use a server that has access to a domain controller, but everybody just installs it on domain controllers.
Domain controller, so yeah.
You do when you, this is some tricky sauce, not tricky sauce, but let me save you some time setting this up. Before you get started with the mid-server working and installing it on a Windows box or a Linux box, you need to create a mid-server user ID. You need to make sure the password's not needing to be reset, set it, and then you need to update it. You need to give the mid-server user that you just created the mid-server user role. Once you do that, it gives it all of the roles that you need for a mid-server service account to run. And last thing is you need to say, follow your own dog food and say web services access only. This checkbox on accounts is half the reason that we have a problem. We'll find service accounts that we can just log into with the UI, and it's not locked down to be a web service only. That being said, we can still do it with curl requests and programmatic, but it just makes it a little bit harder. So this is this is a local mid-server user account. This is an account that you're creating in ServiceNow for the mid-server to create communication. You give it a password, make it a web service only, make sure that the password doesn't need to be reset. Then this is on the domain controller or on the Windows box. You run the installer, you give it the endpoint, you give it the mid-server name, the password, you test it, it works. Then you can also now decide the account that it's going to run under. So in a lot of environments, you have the opportunity to create a local service account that's just going to be a local admin on that box and act as a mid-server account. They do that a lot. Best practice would say you have a Windows AD service account for ServiceNow that you plug in here that's got the right permissions, you've worked through, you understand what it means. Nobody really does that though. Usually it's just a local service account that's got God mode on that box. So once you do that, now you have a mid-server running in your environment. So now your ServiceNow environment is ready, it's set up to start attacking, almost. One of the last things you need to do, which I don't have a screenshot of, I don't think, this is just RVAsec mid-server test that we set up and we're about to attack. On the box that Mike set up, we see the ServiceNow mid-server credentials running. And so we're going to get into, now we're not going to do any more slides. Now we're just going to attack, run through the attacks. There's one last thing that I didn't get slides for. You have to click on the mid-server, and you see how it says validated no? So it's still acting as a mid-server and will get you read data, but for the mid-server to do its really important things, and that's what we're going to attack, you have to validate it. And this is where you can validate the actions you want it to do. This could be a point where you could have some security. You could say what IP addresses are allowed to do, what roles it's allowed to do, all this fun stuff. But the point is, for the testing and for the lab, you need to go through the process of validating the mid-server. It just does some cryptographic checks, make sure the communication is good, and you as the admin are giving this mid-server permission to do, well, in our case, nefarious stuff. But great stuff for the organization, hypothetically. All right, so now we're going to move in, and we're going to do no more slides. We're going to go right into attacking. So, and this is where the demo gods must be appeased. Within our ServiceNow instance, this is our mid-server right here, this Windows box, and I'm sitting in the directory that the scripts live on the Windows box for the mid-server. So this Windows box is the mid-server. Now this is the cloud-based environment. So the first thing we're going to do is I want to show you the handy-dandy way that a mid-server can execute code on a box. And you can do it sleuthily, and you can do it without really any logging, and you can disappear your tracks, but you can get code execution. And this is also by doing it from something you can't get through the UI. This is not through a workflow. This is not through. So this attack is not on the MDSec blog. When you look at the MDSec blog, they talk about using workflows. They talk about doing different things. And I thought it was really neat. And I suggest you read that blog. But this was something that we just kind of came up with. So you notice if I type in the ECC, and I type in ECC_Q, nothing shows up. And if I type in ECCQ list, I end up somewhere. So that is an interesting place to be. Also, before we even get, so the ECCQ, that's an important aspect. I don't remember what ECC stands for. Yeah. We'll get into this in a moment. This is basically, and you really, I couldn't figure out a way to find this in the UI. You just have to know that it's there. But before we get there, if we look at the mid-server, and we look inside here, we see tons of powerful things. If we look at the mid-server, we can look at, or also just before we even get into the attack, one thing I want to show you is the portfolio, the hardware portfolio. Mike, tell me about, during red teams, how important it is if you have a targeted user that you want to get to, finding their box or where they live. Talk a little bit about that and how frustrating it is and techniques that you could think of. Like, you're trying to target a user and find their laptop. Like, what if the hell is that?
Yeah, I mean, like, when you're doing a red team operations, like, some of the people that you always want to go after are the senior developers because they probably have the best keys to different various production things and to get in their machines. And they normally also have sloppier security. And so those are the people that you're trying to find. So when you're going through an organization, you'll normally use Confluence or SharePoint or something like that to try to figure out who's doing what and who's on what project, and who's got permissions to do what, who's the director of
or
X, Y, and
file
Z.
servers. You go to a file server, look for active connections from a named computer.
Yeah.
That you found. But so in ServiceNow, you have the ability to log in and just click on hardware assets, and you'll see their IP address, you'll see the host name, you'll see notes about it. So you can search if you have a name of user. Now this is an example instance. I actually don't have them, but use your imagination. Down here, you'll have things like their VNIC with their IP, their subnet, their host name. So from a data intelligence standpoint, getting access to ServiceNow, you're trying to target individuals and developers, you can find it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So because we're coming up on time, I'm going to move into it. We're going to only do one. It's going to be executing code, and then we're also going to execute controlled malware, a beacon on there, and show you how to get code execution on a domain controller with ServiceNow, which is, every time we get an admin level access into ServiceNow, that means for all intents and purposes, we probably can get remote code execution on a domain controller.
Right.
And what that also means for your organization, if you have ServiceNow and you have unchecked service accounts and you don't know what's going on and you have to account for your administrative users, you're missing a whole slew of them because anybody with admin access to ServiceNow, for all intents and purposes, has admin access to your domain. So let's do that. If we go back to the ECCQ, which you really just kind of have to know, you just have to know that it exists.
Really figure out what the ECC stands for.
We should. It's there.
Like Enterprise Command
external communication
thing. Command. External Communication Command.
So if we go to the ECCQ, We start up a new job. The first thing we want to do is change this queue to output. I know it's the opposite of what you think. You're like, I'm putting commands in, so it would be input. You'd be wrong. So what you want to do is then you want to say the agent that you're operating on. So you say mid server, and then you say the name of the mid server that you're dealing with. The topic is going to be either command or PowerShell. So if you wanted to run PowerShell, just put PowerShell. You want to run command, run command. Now here's two things. So whatever you put in the name value, that will actually be the command that's executed. Or you could put the command in an XML format down here in the block, or you can put the script or command or things you want to do. You do have to do a little XML tomfoolery, and if you're doing less than 120 characters in your command, you could just do the name. So as an example, we're going to run, what are we going to run? We're going to run who am I, we'll run
ipconfig.
Yeah, ipconfig. Who am I? Well, that's not who am I.
Who am I?
Who am I? And ipconfig. So that's all you got to do. And then if we submit this to the ECC queue and it's on the output queue, we'll see the output job jammed out there. And if we wait just a moment and refresh,
You see it right there at the top is output.
there's going to be, after we refresh, there's going to be a corresponding, there will be a corresponding input job.
Yep.
And if you look at the input job, you will see the output, even though it's the input. What do we see here in the response? From the mid server itself, we see the output of who am I and ipconfig. So we have remote command execution on a domain controller in 3 clicks or less. I don't know, I wasn't counting clicks. But that is remote command execution. So, and also, those of you who know about writing your own C2 are probably thinking to yourself, but wait, if I can send a command via a REST API, and I can send it, and I can also see the response from it, could this be an actual C2 channel? It absolutely can, 100%. You could use ServiceNow and the ECC queue to send commands to and from and have full, easy command execution. So now let's go a little, let's do, so that's it. I mean, that's the talk right there, done. We just executed command on a domain controller. But we got 10 more minutes, and I want to show you some absolutely just nonsense things about how you can easily get files to the system and execute a full, whatever, beacon, sliver, endpoint, implant, your own sauce. You know,
Show them how to cover your tracks. with
Well,
that.
that's the last step will be how as a red teamer, you can make this disappear. None of the activity ever happened. Absolutely, we'll get there. So last thing, let me show you some interesting things here. I said ServiceNow could be your attack platform, and I sure as shoot meant it. So if we look at mid-server capabilities here, and we go to script includes. So these are scripts that are included with ServiceNow. Actually, let's go to script files. You can actually, there's a script file by default called install nmap in ServiceNow. So you can do things, and any of these scripts, you can literally just go in. Some of these scripts are called by current workflows that run already. So you think about from a clandestine perspective, you can come in and edit the script files right here. And this is for persistence. You know, there's a probe that runs out every hour to check on a health status of a mid server. You just go in and create yourself a user account and establish a shell again every hour. You have clandestine persistence established with a job that is already running. So you can edit the script files, but check this out. But wait, there's more. So if we look at the script files, I want to show you on the mid server, here's where script files live. Another aspect of this is if you want to say, let me create a new script file. If you name it, so I have a couple script files that are going to pop up there. So one of the script files I have is going to be just the 7-zip binary, because then I have a sliver payload that I have zipped in a password-protected zip file. So Windows can't deal with a password-protected zip by default, and we want to try and be somewhat sleuthy. So I'll say I want to upload 7rexe, say use attachment. The name has to match the file that you're uploading. So you say choose attachment, choose the binary. And once you hit submit, if you go to the mid server and you wait just a moment, we see the 7-zip binary appear. So you need to transfer files to and from. You also have a secure file download and upload, courtesy of ServiceNow. Now let's do the exact same thing with our implant. We have test.7zip. The name has to match the file that you're uploading. When you say use attachment, upload the file. Whoops, you got to choose the file to upload.
Those people are loud next to us.
And now you have uploaded your malicious payload, and we just wait for it, and there it exists there. So the last thing you're going to do is now you're going to use the mid-serve. So you've got your files up there. Now you need to unzip and execute the command. So let's do that. We'll go back to our ECC queue. Which you just have to know is there. And you have to spell it right.
You have to type it right.
Do a new command. We'll say mid.server.rvasec mid. Command. The name of the command is going to be scripts 7zip-r.exe extract. Use your password. And then our implant. They got to make sure it's on the output queue. When you're sending data, it's got to be on the output. That'll screw you up. You submit it. We wait a moment. We look at the input queue. And we see that 7zip has done the thing. If we go to mid-server, it's extracted it up a directory. So we'll go up a directory. We see RVAsecDemo.exe up one directory. And so sitting on this server, I have a listener for Sliver. So now the last step is we do a new command on the ECC queue. Topic is command. Command name is RVAsecDemo.exe. We'll throw an ampersand in there for good measure.
Output.
We'll submit.
Output.
Oh, shit. Well, there you go.
Got to remember that output.
Yeah. So let's see if we can edit that. So we'll edit it, set it to output, update it, try and run it again. And you got two shells. Whoops.
Yeah.
One of them worked because I double checked. So you got your interactive C2 session on a domain controller, courtesy of ServiceNow. So there's a lot more to go over. There's probably 12 other just absolute devastating attacks that you can do with ServiceNow. You can perform port scans. You can perform service discovery, find out what's installed everywhere. You can find out where users are. You can find all sorts of stuff. But what we just showed you is getting remote command execution on domain controller via ServiceNow. That's our RVAsec talk.
Show them how to clean it up. Questions?
Oh, yeah. As you leave and as we leave, this will also remove all your activity. This is not logged anywhere else. This doesn't end up, it may end up in one small log that's 24 hours, but these will, if you go here to the ECC queue and directly remove and delete this activity,
Yeah, that's it.
it never happened. And also, if you have a PowerShell script or a Python script that's running this with requests, you just have the last step of your script be delete the last job from the ECC queue as you go,
Yeah.
and it's never there when you're with your
So
C2.
yeah, we set it up so that the last command it did was go back in there and delete it, so it just don't and just stay empty.
Doesn't show up in logs and stuff
Yeah.
or workflow. So I think that's all the time we have. I hope we're going to put this out. If you have questions or you want us to poke around at your ServiceNow, let us know. But if you want to poke at your ServiceNow, hopefully you're enabled to do it. Woo.